We have heard so much about the Arab Spring and about the revolution in Egypt, which is by far the largest of the Arab states. We have not heard anything like what you're about to hear because this is aimed principally at younger people. I'm looking at a book called Hands Around the Library, Protecting Egypt's Treasured Books. It is published by Dial Books for young readers, a division of Penguin, and our guest is the author, broadcast journalist Karen Leggett. What's the story about?
It's a moment during the revolution, really a glorious moment in Alexandria. Most of the protests we heard about were in Cairo. In Alexandria, the marchers came to the Library of Alexandria, a brand new library built on the ashes of the ancient Great Library of Alexandria. And at one moment, they held hands around the library to protect it from vandals. There had been a few torching of cars and a little bit of burning of police stations, and there was some concern that something might happen to the library. But the library had become such a sanctuary and such a wonderful place for young people and for all people that the young protesters really wanted to protect it. And the director of the library, Dr. Ismail Siraguldin, was quite eloquent on the library's website about his gratitude to the young people and about his feeling that the library had really nurtured many of the ideals that prompted the revolution. Free speech, conversation, all of those things. And this same thing had happened at the Cairo Museum in Cairo, of course, and we heard a little bit about that, but we didn't hear very much publicly, and even a lot of Egyptians in this country were not aware of what had been done to protect their library. It was quite an amazing thing.
It is quite an amazing story. And so this was just essentially a line of the young.
That's exactly right.
With zero power. I mean, anybody, any grown-up with a club or a gun could have just blown right through them. So this was moral suasion only.
That's exactly right, and that is exactly what the director said, and we have that in the book. He said, there is nothing to protect these glass walls but the will of the people. And it was the will of the people, mostly young people, to protect those glass walls. And it stayed protected. And the library was closed for a few days during the revolution, but it opened almost immediately and has since then, even within weeks of the revolution, became a center for conferences, for young people to come and talk about the future, to talk about education. And it continues to be an amazing center for young people.
Did it appear that this was organized or spontaneous or one of these digital age flash mob type of things?
It appears it was spontaneous. The marchers were massing down. There's a huge corniche, a highway right in front of the library, between the library and the Mediterranean Sea. And that highway was jam-packed with people, the same kinds of crowds that we saw on television in Tahrir Square. And a few people broke away from that crowd and came up to the steps of the library and where the library director and some of the library employees were, and they just sort of gradually and spontaneously began holding hands around the library. I don't think the holding hands lasted a particularly long time. It was a part of one day, but it was enough to say, this library is important, leave it alone. And they did.
And what's remarkable is the story that you've told here, in Hands Across the Library. This is such a tricky thing to do. In fact, even as we speak, I'm about to engage on speaking to a class of third graders in my old hometown, and I thought about just doing a dumbed-down version of what I usually say, and it quickly occurred to me how patronizing that would be. And this book speaks to children. It does not talk down to them, and I think you're to be commended for that.
Well, and interestingly, just last week when we were launching the book, we were at Burgundy Farm Country Day School in Alexandria, Virginia, and we initiated a Skype session between the children in Alexandria, Virginia, and children in the library in Alexandria, Egypt. And these were kids from 9 to 11 years old. And we were asking, they initially asked, the first American question was, what's your favorite food? Mm-hmm. And the Egyptian child answered, pizza and hamburgers. So they instantly realized that they had more in common than not. But we also asked them some pretty heavy questions. We were asking them about freedom and voting. And the American children had been talking. These are 4th and 5th graders. And they were talking about freedom, being able to do what you want, but to a point, that there was some responsibility with that freedom, but they had an understanding of freedom. And the Egyptian children, it was the first time they had heard their parents talk about voting. And the librarian, who was a young woman, voted for the first time last year. And that really sort of took the young people in the United States by surprise, because they're a little more accustomed to their parents voting all the time.
I'm wondering if this dialogue across the ocean touched on some of the more disturbing elements of Arab Spring, signs of intolerance, the view that apparently, if in fact at least some Arab populations are left unfettered, that they will go not in a direction that we would tend to think of as freedom, but in a direction that might be more along the lines of Islamist fundamentalism, that there's freedom, all right, up to a point, but you'd better not say anything bad about the Muslim faith. You'd better not try to convert from the Muslim faith, and similar things of that nature. And so it's freedom kind of skewed by at least our standards. Did that come up during the discussion with these kids?
We didn't, no. And I think partly it was because we had a fairly short time, and while the Egyptian youngsters did speak English, there was a limit to the depth of conversation we could get into. And it's been a little uncertain, even particularly a week ago, the sort of the reasons behind the current unrest and difficulties and the intolerance. It's a little bit murky, so we decided not to go there. And I think part of the problem is this understanding of freedom. And if we had a little more time, it would certainly be something to explore, because in the United States, we understand that freedom of speech means, unless you're shouting fire in a crowded room, freedom of speech means you can say obnoxious things. In Egypt and many of the Arab countries, there is a sense that the government will stop obnoxious speech. And what they don't understand is that when you have free speech, the government doesn't do that. And that's sort of that gray area of understanding freedom that we may be having a hard time conveying.
Some of the words in here are very poignant, not certainly grown-up words to some extent, but here, just let me read you this passage. I was surrounded by the sounds of pounding feet and shouting voices. Maybe it was the noise of peaceful people demanding freedom, but maybe the people were so angry that they would hurt each other, hurt me, or hurt our library. And I guess we have to stop and think about this from the standpoint of children. This would have been a pretty brave act for grown-ups to attempt, but for children to do this, that's remarkable. Do we know anything at all about these children as individual people?
Well, most of them, the actual children who were there, and there are certainly photos and pictures and illustrations in the book. Children were brought by their parents, young children, and the 6 to 10-year-old variety were brought by their parents, who obviously expected this to be a peaceful day. The ones who were actually holding their hands around the library and initiated that were probably students, probably college students. And I think a lot of them, we did hear stories then where we are one hand, and Muslims were holding hands with Christians and young people with old people, and there was much more tolerance. We always have to sort of look at those moments of greatness when we can be tolerant, and when that spirit of acceptance does show through. And unfortunately, then we also have the many times when it doesn't. But this was a moment to celebrate, and the Egyptians who read this in this country, who were not particularly aware of it, have found it a new source of pride. The deputy chief of mission at the Egyptian embassy, Yasser al-Nagar, wrote to me and said, "It gives me great pleasure that it has a wonderful ending and a reaffirmation of being proud of my country, Egypt." I think many Egyptians are looking for reasons to be proud. This gives them that. Much of the violence and the sectarian violence does not. So many of the Egyptians and the Muslims are as disturbed by that as we Americans are.
You mentioned the illustrations, and we should note the wonderful collages in the book Hands Around the Library by Susan Roth.
Exactly, and she's a prolific and highly acclaimed author. She's written and illustrated about 40 books, nearly all of them with this marvelous collage that looks almost three-dimensional. It's cut paper. She gets her papers from all over the world, and in many cases you can see in the book she's taken photographs of different portions of the library and used that as the papers in her collages. The opening pages, the library is surrounded by a granite wall with huge granite blocks, and each block has a character from a different alphabet in history and in the world. And that is the backdrop. She used a collage of that as the backdrop for her characters in the book.
It's particularly poignant that this library would be saved when you go back to the great library of Alexandria from antiquity, where documents, priceless documents of the beginnings of European and North African culture have been lost forever. Who knows where they went in the conquests that came, and so this is kind of coming around to at least saving this version.
That's exactly right. Yes, saving the library, and the library itself has incredible projects to digitize ancient manuscripts so that they won't be lost again, and as a division of collecting Islamic history and also collecting modern Egyptian history. So they're really trying to gather, once again, be exactly what the ancient library was to the ancient world, which was a repository for all the knowledge in the world. And this library is trying to do that all over again.
We should note that September is National Library Card Sign-Up Month, and October will be National Friends of Libraries Month. And I suppose many people still may think of libraries in a very analog, dead trees way, when in fact libraries are as much a digital center as anything around today.
And very often libraries are the place where people who don't have computers at home are able to go. It's helping to bridge that digital divide. And there's actually a new organization. Libraries are sort of, it's very easy to cut libraries in schools and in towns. We'll cut the hours, we'll close that one, we'll close this one. There is now a brand new political action committee called everylibrary.org that is raising money specifically to support local ballot initiatives supporting local libraries. And there are about a dozen on the ballot this year in November, and this organization will be supporting them. It's an arm of United for Libraries, which gets all those friends groups together and really drumming up support for libraries around the United States, not just overseas.
Yeah. And you should keep in mind the importance of libraries. Obviously, the young people of Egypt know full well the importance of the library, as is told in this great story, which incidentally has a website, handsaroundthelibrary.com, and that's the name of the book, Hands Around the Library. It is published by Dial Books for young readers, a division of Penguin, and written by our guest, Karen Leggett. We'll be right back.